buttons.
There, that one's rolling.
Yep, they're all good. And then
Camera A rolling, camera B
audio's
rolling.
live. Okay.
All right, do me a favor and just clap, just to sync all this stuff up. Perfect, that's it. All right, so you'll be talking straight to me. Let's just go down the questions and we'll go from there. So please tell us about yourself and your area of expertise regarding the topic of abortion.
Do I need to say my name?
Yeah, you can say your name.
Oh, okay.
And you talk straight to me. You just,
okay.
ignore the camera.
Talk to you, not to the camera.
Exactly,
Okay.
yeah.
Well, my name is Nathan Nobis. I'm a philosophy professor. I have a PhD in philosophy.
I'm going to stop you real fast. That AC unit
That
just kicked
was
on.
loud. Yeah, I'll turn it off. That
Yeah.
literally has not been on all morning until you just started.
It's a miracle.
Second.
A miracle.
You control it by the thermostat.
That's so funny.
This unit is controlled by wall thermostat. As soon as you start talking, it kicked on. And it should be an off. That's not it. Sorry, it's this one. Oh, that one. Yeah, we'll just give it a minute. It'll probably take a little while to turn off.
All right.
That's funny. It really has. It's like we've been in here for 2 hours and that hasn't kicked on.
Funny.
Yeah, just give it a minute. Cool. Everything good? Everything's still rolling? Okay.
Yeah.
Again, please tell us about yourself and your area of expertise regarding the topic of abortion.
Okay. My name is Nathan Nobis. I'm a philosophy professor. I have a PhD in philosophy. I've been teaching philosophy for around 20 years, more than 20 years. And my interests are broad, and they include ethics and bioethics. And abortion is one of those topics. And so when this topic became sort of more sort of salient to the public in various ways, I noticed that there's a lot of bad arguments out there, and philosophers are interested in good arguments. So I have tried to do a little bit to get better arguments out there and critique bad arguments, and try to help more people better understand these sorts of issues and better evaluate the arguments on the issues.
Perfect.
So,
Shift your microphone just a hair. See, it's a little off. It should be fine on audio, so that's fine. I was really tempting to shift your eye line towards the camera, but try to keep it on me.
Okay.
Just every once in a while, you were kind of glancing at it.
okay.
It's really hard because I'm sure, do you do like YouTube and stuff?
Yes.
Yeah, so it's all you're used to talking to the camera.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right,
Okay.
I will try.
Okay.
Do you want to redo that, or are you okay?
It's fine. So this is why I've got 2 cameras. So even
Okay.
when you glance at this one, I can just cut to that angle.
Okay.
So it's fine. I mean, if you want to, if you feel comfortable with how that was, then that's fine. I think it was fine.
Okay.
So, okay. All right. In your own words, please explain what is an abortion.
Well, philosophy is sort of all about different definitions, and some definitions of various things are better than others, and there are many definitions of abortion out there. Indeed, sort of defining it is kind of a controversial issue, but we, or many philosophers, define an abortion as the intentional killing of a fetus to end a pregnancy. And many philosophers think this is a better definition than, say, murdering babies, which is a bad definition because it assumes that abortion is murder and therefore wrong. It assumes that fetuses are babies, which are wrong to kill. So that would be called what's called a question-begging definition. It just assumes things it shouldn't assume. Another common definition is like the intentional termination of a fetus to end a pregnancy. And we think that's kind of vague, like, well, what is a termination? What are you doing when you're terminating? And the answer would be, well, you have something that's alive biologically, and you're making it no longer alive, and that's usually called killing something. But of course, killing often isn't wrong, so killing is actually more of a neutral term. So we go with the intentional killing of a fetus to end a pregnancy. That seems to fit many abortions.
Okay, perfect. Good. Okay. So the follow-up to that question is, what is elective versus therapeutic abortion?
Abortions can be done for a variety of reasons, but like the reasons you do something don't change what it is. So there are abortions that are done for what are clearly medical reasons, and there are abortions that are done not for clearly medical reasons, but they're both abortions. So I suppose the first could be called therapeutic, but the other's not therapeutic. But it doesn't really matter. In some circles, there's sort of a bad move to attempt to define abortions in such a way that medically necessary abortions are not abortions, and other ones are abortions. But that is confused and incoherent, and people shouldn't talk that way.
Perfect. How would you describe your position on the topic of abortion choice policy? Are you pro-life, pro-choice, anti-abortion, abortion choice, a combination of these, or something else?
I am pro-choice, but I consider myself like a pro-choice moderate, meaning there are some pro-choice people who seem to think like every possible abortion would have to be fine. But my view would be, well, early abortions are fine, they're morally permissible, definitely should be legal, whereas far later abortions do raise special ethical issues.
Perfect. If the law were totally undecided about abortion, where would you draw the line on abortion choice policy and why?
I'm not a lawyer or a public policy expert, but I think there's sort of two possibilities. One would be to think that sort of these are private matters that the government should stay out of. This would be a conservative position, so to speak, on these sorts of issues. So that's a potential model that I sometimes am attracted to. Another would be sort of more of a European model, where it's pretty much sort of unrestricted till around sort of 15 weeks and then more regulated after that.
Okay. He has some subnotes on this particular question, so I'm going to kind of go through some of the subnotes and see
Okay.
if you have anything to say on any of those.
Okay.
The first one is, would you support a time-bound restriction, say 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 15 weeks, 21 weeks, etc.?
Well, the European model, I believe, is kind of around 15 weeks or so. But what's key is after that, it's not like there's some sort of absolute ban, because they still allow some abortions after that. They're just sort of not as readily available. But as a matter of fact, most abortions happen rather early in pregnancy anyway. Not all, but most do. So a sort of 15-week or whatever 4-month sort of restriction would sort of work for most people most of the time.
Okay. It says, what about outside restrictions such as parental or father notification or restrictions using federal funds?
I don't know what I have to say about that.
That's okay.
I meant to look up. I've wondered, like, are there currently laws that a pregnant woman must notify the father or potential father, or her potential partner if she's pregnant? I don't know if there are such laws. In this case, I don't really know how such a law or rule would really work. So I don't know. I've got
That's
nothing to say about that.
That's fine. Let's see here. This one says, or another subnote is some of the customary allowances for therapeutic abortion, rape pregnancies, incest pregnancies, fetal deformity, handicap, diseases, etc.
Well, sometimes some people say, like, well, abortion should be okay in cases of like rape or incest or major medical problems for the fetus or something like that. And I agree with that, but I just think early abortions are generally okay. So they're okay for basically kind of any reason. You don't need some special reason to have an abortion sort of early in pregnancy. So, and actually, I mean, it used to be sort of anti-abortion people were sort of more open to these sorts of exceptions, say in rape, pregnancies that result from rape. But it seems like kind of recently they have come to recognize that their view doesn't really support that, because they'll sort of say things like, well, you know, a baby that comes about by rape is no less valuable than a baby that doesn't. So it seems like they have at least made their view sort of consistent in that sort of way. But in general, I think I argue that early abortions are fine for whatever reason. So yeah, they would especially be fine if the pregnancy resulted from rape or incest, or there's some major medical problem or something like that. But what also would be fine would be like, I just don't want another child. I don't want a child. I don't want to be pregnant now. This isn't a good time. Whatever. That would be fine too.
Okay, the next section. Okay, it says the same subnote. These are still continuing. This one says restrictions on abortion procedures. Examples are no chemical burning, dismemberment abortions, partial abortions, negligent death for botched abortions, where the child survives but injured, frail, and is left to die.
In terms of methods of abortions, well, most abortions are medical. You know, they happen by way of pills, and the sort of embryo or fetus is very small, very undeveloped. And my main issue is whether the fetus is conscious, aware, able to feel things, and such. And so I would want to sort of evaluate any of those methods by trying to figure out, like, well, does that happen to like a conscious feeling subject or not? Because I think people might want to sort of describe those things and make it sort of sound gruesome. But if there's nobody there who's experiencing these sorts of things, then they really wouldn't be gruesome or whatever. So evaluating these things would depend upon sort of the facts about fetuses being conscious and feeling and things like that. But as a matter of fact, most abortions are very early, and there's definitely not some sort of conscious and feeling being that's affected by those.
Okay. This one says no restrictions up until birth, which I think you kind of covered that a little bit. Did you on the?
So there are some pro-choice people who insist that there should be like sort of no restrictions at all, and but I think most, and those are often like the most vocal people, but the sort of more moderate majority seems to recognize that, oh, you know, I've seen a pregnant woman before. I sort of know what like 8 months into pregnancy kind of looks like, and if there were an abortion sort of that late, the sort of average moderate person is going to say there's got to be like a really good reason to do that, given what they think about what fetuses are like at that point, given other options, etc. But again, those cases are sort of very rare, which is sort of why or comparatively rare, which is why I sort of focus on the majority of abortions, which are rather early.
And you're just really fast, because I think you answered this, but I can't remember. What was your what would your cutoff time be for that, something like that? Like how late would you say was too late?
Well, So there's scientific attempts to determine when fetuses become conscious and feeling, and that, of course, is a complicated matter. You need sort of the right anatomy. It needs to be sort of hooked up in the right sort of way. Some people argue birth sort of make things very significant in terms of being able to feel, but I tend to, there's a sort of common number of like 20 weeks, which is, by my math, 5 months. So perhaps mid-pregnancy is when fetuses become conscious, feeling. Maybe it's a little bit earlier. There's some research, sort of speculative, that maybe it's earlier, but that's still not sort of first trimester. That's not early in pregnancy. So sometimes some anti-abortion people bring out some speculative research that says, like, maybe, possibly, fetuses can feel pain at 12 weeks. Or they're like conscious and aware at 12 weeks. Well, even if you like accepted that, that would be like a moderate pro-choice sort of view, because you'd be thinking like, well, okay, before that, I guess maybe abortions would be okay, and that would be, again, like most abortions. So, whatever the numbers are, most abortions are pretty early. So, wherever you pick, most abortions are going to be before that.
And you basically say, like, but when they're conscious, that's when the consciousness is there, that's when it's not okay?
Well, it's not that it's not okay, it's that you would need some sort of better reason to do it than just sort of merely, I don't want to be pregnant anymore. On the thought that basically, if you have a conscious feeling being, then it matters how that being is treated. So it becomes sort of a harder issue at that point.
The next one you wouldn't agree with anyways. It's after-birth abortion, as suggested by a guy that I cannot pronounce his name. G.I.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There was some article in some journal, bioethics journal, I think, proposing something called afterbirth abortion. I don't remember the details of that article, but it might have been sort of needlessly provocative, because that sometimes happens. It could have been, suppose there's a baby born with sort of a major medical problem that is going to make their life very, very, very low quality, always in sort of pain and suffering. Sort of two questions. Could it be okay to sort of let such a baby die? And many people of sort of all stripes and persuasions are going to say, yeah, it sounds like it could be okay to let that baby die, given that their life prospects are so grim. Well, there are arguments that basically amount to, well, sometimes if you think it could be okay to let somebody die, it would actually be better to sort of like actively kill them. Why would that be? Well, because you're thinking they're better off no longer living, and you're thinking it would be okay to let them die. Well, why are you letting them die? Because their quality of life is so bad, and like they would no longer want to keep living. Well, if they would no longer want to keep living, it would be better to more quickly sort of take them out of life, and you could do that more quickly by sort of humanely euthanizing them. So that might have been what this sort of afterbirth abortion was, maybe. And if you put it that way, it might not be as shocking as it sounds. People sort of like to be shocked and can find things that are shocking that aren't really so shocking.
What do you consider to be the strongest reasons or arguments supporting abortion on demand? i.e., elective abortion is ethical and or should be legal because?
I think the strongest arguments basically are kind of two things kind of combined. One would be that embryos and beginning fetuses are not conscious or feeling or aware of anything. They're not subjects like we are. They don't have a perspective on the world. You could describe that as if you're not like that, you're not a person. So one part of the case would be beginning fetuses and embryos like lacking minds, lacking consciousness of any type, and the thought that, well, beings like that are okay to kill. Why is that? Well, because beings like that don't have a perspective on the world. Things can't get worse for a being like that. They can't be harmed, because to be harmed requires that you take a turn for the worse. You have to have a subject that's taking a turn for the worse. And that just can't happen with embryos and beginning fetuses. Maybe it can happen with later fetuses, but not beginning fetuses. So take that and combine that with like bodily autonomy sorts of concerns, like people have a right to their body. People aren't always obligated to use their bodies to help, to assist others, and they're especially not obligated to assist beings that aren't persons, that aren't conscious, aren't aware, and have never been anything like that.
What do you consider to be the strongest reasons or arguments against abortion on demand? Elective abortion is not ethical or should not be legal because. What are the strongest arguments against it?
Well, I don't think that there are strong arguments against abortions, but I think there are arguments that can appear to be strong to people who aren't particularly skilled at evaluating arguments. It's very common for people to argue that, oh, well, embryos are human beings and it's wrong to kill human beings, so embryos are wrong to kill, so abortion's wrong. Well, it's well known in philosophy that what human being means is a somewhat complicated matter, and there's at least sort of two meanings of human being. One is like a human being is like literally like a being that's biologically human, or a biologically human organism. Well, yeah, of course embryos and beginning fetuses are biologically human organisms. I mean, they're not cats, they're not dogs, they're biologically human organisms. But just because something is a biologically human organism doesn't mean that it has sort of rights or is wrong to kill. I mean, we are biologically human organisms, but we don't have sort of the right to life or a wrong to kill because we're biologically human organisms. I mean, we know we're that. What makes us have sort of the rights that we have? And this is a little abstract, and people don't like to think about abstract things sometimes. But sort of common answers, say from the history of ethics, amount to, well, we sort of have the basic rights we have because we are sort of conscious feeling beings and things can go better and worse for us. That would sort of be like a utilitarian sort of justification. Another would be like, well, we're conscious feeling beings with wills, with preferences. Well, take that and that's kind of a Kantian sort of justification. So basically, they're human beings, so they're wrong to kill, so abortion's wrong, doesn't think about like, well, what do you mean by human beings, and what makes human beings wrong to kill when they're wrong to kill, and do embryos and beginning fetuses have those sorts of things? I mean, we know they're biologically human bodies, but just because we are biologically human bodies doesn't make us wrong to kill. And you can see that by thinking about sort of like end-of-life cases. You know, suppose somebody's in a permanent coma. Imagine we somehow know that the coma is permanent. Must we keep their body alive? Again, eventually people are going to say, well, there's no real benefit to that individual for doing that because, like, it seems like the individual is gone, or have them brain dead. There's like a living body. So we're pretty familiar with the idea of like oh, once consciousness has like permanently ended, the person is gone. There are not obligations to that body. We could let that body go. So we're familiar with brain death, but there's a flip side concept of brain birth or being brain alive that can apply at sort of the beginnings of life too.
You still good on time? Good? Okay, keep going.
So I can mention there's another sort of common, kind of even more abstract anti-abortion argument that says like, well, embryos are the kind of being that's a rational being. And if you're the kind of being that's a rational being, then you sort of have basic rights. And this is sort of abstract because it appeals to this idea of a kind and this sort of idea that, well, if you're of a group and some members of the group have these features like basic rights, then since you're of the group, you get those features too. And I think to many people, they find this sort of mystifying, like, how does that really work? I mean, just because you're of a group, just because you're of a kind, doesn't mean you have all the characteristics of everybody of that kind. So, again, I think this can kind of sound good, but if you sort of investigate it, many people sort of don't understand exactly, well, how does this really work? And then, like, well, suppose there's somebody who's brain dead, or there's this brain dead body, or there's a permanently comatose individual. It seems like they can be treated quite differently from how we can be treated. But are they of the same kind as us? If this kind idea is correct, then I guess we have to keep them alive as long as possible. Or they're of a different kind. If they're of a different kind, then we can say embryos and beginning fetuses are a different kind than us too. Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of this kind move. By classifying things into groups, you can sort of group all sorts of things in different ways to get different results. So,
what do you consider to be the weakest reasons or arguments for abortion? And we'll do the flip side of that in a minute. So, what are the weakest arguments for abortion?
well, there are all sorts of bad arguments for and against abortion. I mean, it's just very common that people give bad arguments on these topics. Why would that be? All right. It's very common that people give very bad arguments on all sides of these issues. So one very common thing is that people give arguments that are called question-begging arguments. They basically just sort of assert their own view in like different words, and they just assume that their view is correct without giving sort of any reasons. So question-begging arguments are super common. Can I look at my little book?
Sure.
To remind myself?
Yeah, go ahead. No problem.
Yeah. So,
I'm going to actually go ahead and pause the recording while you're doing that, because
Okay.
I'm going to switch out this memory card.
okay.
Let's go ahead and...
Do you want me to pause this one too, just so it syncs up?
Yep, go ahead and pause
Pause
that.
the audio as well.
Just hit on the audio, I hit stop. And you know what I may be able to do is I may be able to just... Because one thing I forgot to do is... Oh no, I need to keep that. Let's go to search that and go to media, eject, media successfully ejected, take that out. Let's just switch the card real fast. These cameras take up so much memory, they don't last very long on card space.
Sure. So, do you have any idea when this project might be done?
Well, their original deadline for me was the end of this month, and that's not going to happen.
Uh-huh.
We're still doing interviews, so we don't know just yet. I think they're hoping to do like a rough, soft launch of it by the end of April, but that's still pending. All right. I'll go ahead and roll on that one.
Rolling on this one.
Check my focus.
Audio is live. Do you want to give us another clap?
Okay. And do you want me to kind of repeat it? It's basically just what do you consider to be the weakest arguments for abortion and the weakest arguments against abortion?
Okay. There are so many bad arguments against abortion on both sides. Why would this be? Well, perhaps people just don't know a whole lot about the issue. They think they do, but they really don't. And they also just don't really know a whole lot about what makes arguments good and bad. I mean, why would they know that? Where would they learn that? Unless they've taken classes on these sorts of topics. They're not really apt to know that. So one type of very common but very bad argument would be a question-begging argument.
I'll get you to.
What?
Yeah, I was going to get you to close the book. Are you
Oh.
reading it from the book or?
I need to remember. Yeah.
Oh, that's fine. If you want to maybe just kind of lay it on the table. That way
Okay.
it's not up so high.
Okay.
Okay, then we'll just kind of go there.
Yeah, so question-begging arguments are super common. Question-begging arguments are arguments where the reason given just assumes the conclusion. So it's very common for people to assert abortion's wrong because abortion's murder. Well, murder just means wrongful killing. So you're saying killing fetuses is wrong because it's wrong to kill fetuses. That's just circular reasoning. Abortion is wrong because women who have abortions are irresponsible. Well, what does irresponsible mean? Doing wrong. Having an abortion is wrong because if you have an abortion, you're doing something wrong. So this type of circular reasoning is super common. Abortion is killing babies and children. Well, babies and children are kind of like almost by definition like wrong to kill. So you're saying abortion's wrong because you're killing something that's wrong to kill. So it's very common for people to give reasons that just assume the conclusion, and that's super bad. Yeah, I mean, that's always bad.
Yeah.
So, I mean, this happens with pro-choice people too. They're not a whole lot better in this regard because, again, I mean, they've never really learned about these sorts of issues. They don't take classes about how to figure out whether arguments are better and worse. So, saying abortion's okay, abortion's not wrong because it's a personal choice. Well, personal choices, we tend to think of personal choices as things that aren't wrong. It's my personal choice what tie to wear. Is it my personal choice to blow up a building for fun, blow up a church? No, that's not my personal choice. We wouldn't call it that because personal choices are actions that are not wrong. So in calling an abortion a personal choice, it's like you're saying it's not wrong. Abortion's not wrong because women have a right to do whatever they want with their own bodies. Well, if you think about that in a literal way, that would seem to sort of justify doing like anything with your body. But clearly you can't do anything and everything with your body. So there's these common simplistic question-begging arguments, slogans. It's also very common especially for anti-abortion people, to give arguments that if you know like the tiniest bit about logic, you can see that those are bad arguments. So it's very common for people to say, fetuses are alive, they're life, so they're wrong to kill. Well, to complete that argument, you need to add a premise that says something like, if something is alive or life, then it's wrong to kill. And it doesn't take much effort to realize, well, that's not true. Like mold's alive, bacteria's alive. So just because embryos are alive doesn't mean they're wrong to kill. So the person might say, oh, that's not what I meant. Well, you should have said what you meant. You really should know what you're talking about. So maybe they'll say, well, they're human life, so they're wrong to kill. Well, suppose there was a blob. That unstated premise is like all human life is usually wrong to kill. What if you had like a petri dish of some human cells? Would those cells be wrong to kill? Probably not. Well, that's not what I meant. I meant that they're a alive, biologically human organism, and so they're wrong to kill. They're not just random cells. They're biologically human organisms. Well, we're getting a little more... There's progress here, but then we're going to ask, like, all right, we know they're biologically human organisms, and we are biologically human organisms. but are we wrong to kill because we are biologically human organisms? And the better answers are gonna be like, no, not really. It's because of these psychological characteristics that we have, not because we're of this biological classification. And then we're back to asking, well, all right, do embryos have those psychological characteristics? No. Do beginning fetuses have those psychological characteristics? No. So the later ones, maybe. So there's all sorts of bad arguments.
Good. You have argued that abortion isn't harmful. What do you mean by that claim?
Well, to think about the claim that abortion isn't harmful, or early abortions aren't harmful to fetuses, you need to think about, well, what is it to harm somebody, or what is harm? And one idea about what harm is to harm somebody is to make them worse off compared to how they were. Another idea of harm is something is harmful to someone if their well-being level is worse because of it. Well, both those definitions of harm, which are common definitions of harm, require that there be like a someone, a conscious being that things can take a turn for the worse for. And embryos, beginning fetuses, are not conscious beings, so things can't take a turn for the worse for them. So they cannot be harmed. If you think about what harm is, how harm is best defined, and apply that to, like, well, can non-conscious and never conscious beings be harmed? So if I didn't emphasize the never conscious or never been conscious bit before, that's important. People sometimes don't listen very carefully and think, oh, you think like a fetus is like somebody taking a nap. No, an embryo is not like somebody taking a nap, because, you know, if you or I go to sleep and wake up, well, there's a person before and after, and the person before and after is like connected by our sort of memories and knowledge and experiences and relationships and stuff like that. And an embryo has never had anything like that. So, yeah. So if you were killed in your sleep, I hope it doesn't happen, but if you were killed in your sleep, that would be bad for you. That would make you worse off compared to how you were. That would take away your well-being level in a harmful manner. An embryo or beginning fetus is not like you in that regard, in that things can't go worse for them. And of course, babies are aware of the world, experiencing things can go better and worse for babies, newborn babies. But again, that's not the case for embryos and beginning fetuses.
Do you consider your position on abortion to be a humanitarian? If so, how so? If not, why not?
I don't really understand what that question is asking.
We can skip that one. Yeah,
What?
I don't understand that either. He's just asking if do you consider yourself to be a humanitarian?
I don't know what that means.
Yeah,
so
that's fine.
I mean,
skip that one.
I don't-
What do pro-lifers, in your view, seem to misunderstand most about the abortion choice position?
I think what anti-abortion people seem to most misunderstand is basically just that they have these very simplistic, bad arguments against abortion, and they're very often unable or unwilling to sort of examine those simplistic bad arguments to see that they're bad arguments, and to find out that the issue is a little more complicated than they suspected it was. So basically they have these very common, they're human beings. And again, yes, we know they're biologically human, but just because something is biologically human doesn't make something wrong to kill. So there's this sort of willful ignorance that can result when people are passionate about an issue, where they're kind of unable to sort of step back and come to understand the various positions in a genuinely fair and balanced way, and so are able to sort of really understand things and evaluate things more fairly. So yeah, there's, they're human beings. Well, they seem to have a hard time thinking about what human being might mean, the different arguments that could result from different definitions of human being. There's this biological definition, but another definition of human being is basically like a biologically human organism that is a person, or who is a person, that's like this conscious feeling being. And clearly, embryos and beginning fetuses are biologically human organisms, but they're not human beings in that second definition. So in the second definition is the one that like matters morally, not the first one, or so the arguments suggest. So another is, their life, they're living. Well, just because something's living and alive doesn't make it wrong to kill it. They may just insist that embryos and fetuses have the right to life. However, they have not read this sort of famous article by Judith Thompson where it's observed that, well, just because you have the right to life doesn't mean that you have the right to somebody else's body. So there's these just complications that they often kind of want to avoid, at least for the average sort of anti-abortion person that you might encounter anywhere.
What do pro-choicers, in your view, seem to misunderstand most about abortion life position?
I think so. People sometimes ask me, like, what do you think the best anti-abortion arguments are? And my response, or my thought is, this isn't sort of an argument, but I think the concern about like later fetuses and how later fetuses might be conscious and experiencing and might feel pain, I think that's a sort of good concern on the part of anti-abortion people. However, it's like pro-choice moderate people agree that that's an important concern too. But there are the kind of more vocal pro-choice people out there seem to want to insist that no, nothing about any fetus could ever matter about anything. It's always just bodily autonomy. So I think the sort of exclusive emphasis on bodily autonomy, in particular when it comes to sort of later abortions, why somebody would think that's kind of problematic and think like, well, bodily autonomy isn't everything. If there's like an experiencing fetus, somehow that should count, somehow. I think that's something that some sort of more vocal pro-choice people kind of overlook. Yeah, I think that would be like the main thing.
That's good. If you could wave a magic wand and directly change the way abortion is addressed in politics and the public square, what would you change, or what would you, basically what would you change?
Well, I think here, if I have a magic wand and I can change how people think about abortion, I think what I would use my magic wand for is that I'd want to use it to change how people think about all sorts of things. And the main themes of the change would be, I would want people to actually sort of understand issues in a way that they usually don't now. And by understand them, I mean like understand the sort of range of positions out there and understand sort of the different sides of the issue. Because usually for most issues these days, there's a lot of polarization. It's us versus them. We're the good guys, they're the evil guys. And sometimes there's something to that, but oftentimes things are a little more subtle. And one side doesn't even really know what the other side thinks. They don't if you ask them, what are those people you disagree with? What are their arguments? They're not going to be able to accurately report on what their arguments are. They're just going to think that they think something that they really don't. And why does this happen? Well, there's sort of a theory that people kind of talk about things to sort of impress your friends and fit in with your buddies. And so basically there's sort of this groupthink phenomena where different sides sort of circle their wagons and pat each other on the back about how great they are and how stupid the people they disagree with are. And this results in basically there's sort of no incentive to try to figure out, well, what do those people really think? And in particular, do they have a good point about anything? Like, is there anything that we could agree on about anything? That's not really how you sort of make friends and influence people if your goal is kind of rallying your own troops. So, and this type of thing is like true about all sorts of issues, and abortion is just sort of one instance of that, where you have this honestly very complicated issue, but people want to sort of make it super simple, and in making it super simple, they become basically extremists, and sort of one definition of an extremist is basically somebody who's sort of unable and unwilling to recognize that the other side has some legitimate concerns, legitimate perspectives. So you're just like blinded to anything like that. So so if I could take my magic wand, I would want it to be such that, like, for all things, when some topic comes before them, they sort of ask themselves, before reacting, they ask themselves, do I really, really know anything about this topic? Have I learned about this topic in a, like, genuinely fair and balanced sort of way? Or have I only learned about it from within my own little group? Because if you're working from just your own little group, it can very easily happen that some people in that group say, oh, that's what those people think. And turns out that's not really accurate. But it like rallies the group and, yeah, let's get them. Yeah. So, finding out what other people think, being able to explain their views, say like if people are in like counseling, like couples counseling, it's sort of very common for trying to teach people, like, all right, I want you to be able to explain what the other person just said. Like, I heard you say this, rather than just reacting. Is this what you really think? Yes or no? And if it's not accurate, like, correct it. So at root, like, people just actually accurately understanding what other people think. That could be an improvement. That would be an improvement.
That was the last question I had. So is there anything that you wanted to add that you think would be useful, or anything you want to add to the videos?
I don't know.
That's okay. Yeah, that's fine. And then Nathan, do you agree for us to use this footage for the abortion museum?
Sure.
Okay.
I guess.
Great. All right, sounds good.
Okay.
That's it. I mean, that's all the questions he had.
I don't know. Is there anything more you wanted to hear about?
Let's do this, because one of the things he was having me ask a bunch of the pro-life people, and I think it'd be interesting to get your answer on this as well, is if you could leave, because people that are going to be exploring the abortion museum, if you could leave them with one thing, or let's say this, if you could say one thing to all the fair-minded pro-life people, what would you say? If there's something you could say to them, what would you say?
If I could say one thing to anti-abortion people, it would be that abortion is actually a complex issue. They often seem to think that it's very simple, but it's actually very complicated. So, figuring out, coming to understand why it's complicated, would benefit them greatly.
And then on the opposite end of that, is there anything that you would say to all the fair-minded pro-choice people out there?
Um, hmm. I think that maybe to the fair-minded pro-choice people, I think it would be beneficial for them to find out that they actually agree with anti-abortion people on a lot of things. In particular, they often agree with at least one premise of common anti-abortion arguments. Like, they agree that embryos and beginning fetuses are biologically alive. They agree that they're biologically human. They agree that they are organisms. They agree on all that, but after that, things get more abstract, and that's an opportunity to sort of engage deeper arguments and explain and come to understand and explain why, even though those things are all true, that doesn't mean that abortion's wrong. And if they could like acknowledge those things that are true that anti-abortion people focus on, maybe acknowledging that would help them sort of think about the full argument, the full reasoning, and that could lead to progress. So doing that would be far better than calling them names or saying, who cares? We have the right to abortion anyway. It would be better to learn more about the arguments so that you can affirm, yeah, that's true, but the full argument from that truth to that conclusion doesn't work out, and here's why. So that would be my suggestion.
That's good. And then the last thing that I think would be beneficial is just how important do you think this issue is? Do we need to be talking about this? And just in your opinion, how important is this issue?
This is a very important issue. Having children, not having children is very important. And ironically, I guess it seems to me that a broadly pro-choice person, or a broadly pro-choice position, really should be more of a sort of conservative point of view, or sort of aligned with both liberals and conservatives on the thought that these are very important private issues, and you don't want like the government controlling your private life in these sorts of ways, unless there's a really good reason not to do so. And I don't think there's some good reason for government interference into these sorts of matters, basically because there's not a good reason to think that killing embryos or beginning fetuses, you are not killing people, you are not murdering anybody, you're not doing anything wrong, and so it's like major government overreach to try to control that, regulate that, prevent people from doing what's not wrong. Basically, if you make it illegal for people to do what's not wrong, you are basically bringing about injustice. So, it would be a very important issue for all sorts of reasons.
Perfect. All right. That's all I had for you, Nathan.
Okay. I
Thank
guess
you so
one little
much.
thing. I do have like a free.
Yeah.
We have these books that are freely available electronically.
Okay.
I don't know if I can. And people have even translated it: Spanish, Italian,
Yeah.
French.
Yeah. I mean, you
Uh,
like, make it available. You mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So if you could send me like a link to it or something.
Okay.
You could even.
Yeah, I actually, I have a question.
Sure,
And
yeah, go for it.
I don't know if it would add anything, but I'm really curious. I love what listening to what you're talking about and hearing your perspective on all of this, and especially whenever you're talking about like opening the conversation
Uh-huh.
and being willing to talk, like
Uh-huh.
both sides.
Uh-huh.
We
Yeah.
often end up going to extremes, and then nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So I love the interaction here, and you're talking about how this is such a huge issue. Like, I mean, because if pro-abortionists are correct, well then, you know, it's not really of huge consequence whether you kill a fetus or not.
Right.
But if the anti-abortion position is correct, well then it's a really big deal,
Mm-hmm.
because then you've got the issue of like human life and things like that.
Mhm.
So both perspectives, it has a lot of weight. So I'm curious, in having those discussions and things like that, what would it like? What sort of thing would you have to see or be proven to you or whatever for you to actually shift your position, or to be like, oh, okay, I can
That's a good
actually
one. Yeah.
I can actually agree with you now on the anti-abortion.
Yeah. Basically, is there anything that would persuade you to
Convince you,
change
yeah.
your position? Yeah.
And what would that have to be? Like,
Yeah.
to actually say, okay, because you've provided this evidence, then I could agree with you.
Yeah. That's a good one.
Um,
Yeah.
I think for me the only sort of important information would be if there's sort of ever kind of better information about fetal consciousness. I mean, that would be kind of the only thing
Yeah.
that really matters. I mean, you mentioned like human life, but like again, obviously it's literally human life.
But it'd need to be
So-
you're conscious.
And,
Yeah.
yeah, and I'm meaning more from the definitions that the anti-abortionists are giving. So, like, as far as, because like you're familiar with both sides of the argument, for
Mhm.
sure. So I'm curious as to what evidence they would have to provide in order for you to shift your position to agree with them rather than the position that you currently hold. Like, or is
Well-
there something that would?
Are you an atheist?
Well, that doesn't matter.
Well, I was
mean,
wondering.
That's
'cause-
another bit of confusion.
Well, because the
here.
reason I was thinking is because a lot of pro-life people, what they would claim is that it is a it's the essence of humanity is more than just like the consciousness is basically what. So that's how they would say that life begins prior to just the consciousness of that particular being, and so.
Well, except religious people usually don't really think that.
Mhm.
I mean, religious people and a lot of people will deny that they are their body. You know, are you and your body the same thing?
Right.
They're apt to say no.
Right.
Why would that be? Well, a lot of them think there's like an afterlife. They think they will exist in an afterlife. Even if their body is like blown to smithereens, they think that somehow I will continue to exist in an afterlife. I'll exist either with sort of like no physical body or some sort of different physical body. But either way, they are not their body. So, yeah, I mean, if they are not their body, what are they? Well, they are somehow their mind. And so, basically, people would think like, well, if you think you're your mind, then at the very least, a beginning fetus does not have a mind.
But what you're saying is basically just the consciousness is where you would say that that's the important thing. And so, from his question is you need to see something showing that consciousness begins prior to that, right? That's what you said would persuade you basically if consciousness began prior to what we think.
Well, yeah, I mean that's kind of the most sort of relevant information.
Okay.
In terms of the other things, I don't really know what like an other thing could be. I mean, again, you mentioned human life, and I'm going to think like, well, very literally, of course, it's human life. It's not like a duck, not like a cat or anything. It's biologically human life, but what makes biologically human life wrong to kill when it's wrong to kill, and kind of all the sort of leading hypotheses, best answers on that from the history of philosophy are like, well, there needs to be like a conscious subject.
Right.
There needs to be like a conscious being there.
Cool.
So you get that from Mill, you'll get that from Kant, you'll get that from Rawls, you'll get that from all sorts of folks. Now there is this other idea that says like, well, actually there doesn't have to be or have ever been a conscious subject. It's just as long as the body is the kind of being that is a rational being. So that's a hypothesis, but we can fairly wonder like, well, how exactly does that work? Because, you know, in many cases, being a kind of a being doesn't mean that you have the characteristics of, you know, how that group is characterized. You know, it's kind of like, yeah, I don't know. You know, embryos are the kind of being that's rational beings. Okay, embryos are the kinds of beings that are autonomous beings. If a being is autonomous, it should be able to make its own choices. Well, you know, embryos like can't make choices, but how does this all work out? So basically, just this kind hypothesis doesn't. Let me give a better one.
Like, if you can direct it towards me, that
Oh,
way
okay,
it's just so
okay.
yeah.
You know, a toddler is the kind of being that's a rational, autonomous being. You know, you are a rational, autonomous being. So if you want to if you want to walk in the street, you should be able to walk in the street. And it'd be wrong to prevent you from walking in the street. Well, a toddler is the kind of being that you are. Does that mean we should allow a toddler to walk in the street? No. Even though they're that kind, that doesn't matter. You know, we should view the toddler as they are in and of themselves. And we can even sort of think like, well, all right, they're the kind of being that will become autonomous and rational, but they're not that now. And since they're, given what they're like now, we shouldn't treat them like how they will be later. So again, there's this kind grouping move that is hard to sort of understand if you think about it in a systematic way and wonder, well, when does this reasoning ever work in other situations? Does it ever work in other situations? Or how does this all work? Because it seems just very sort of ad hoc, made up for this particular occasion,
All right.
but bad for others.
Did you want to say anything about the book really fast while I've got the camera rolling?
Sure. So, me and a co-author, basically years ago in 2019, came to think, I mean, the issue was coming more on the scene, and we thought it would be great to make something that would sort of give people the basics of what they would get from a great philosophy class on this. So we developed this open access book, Thinking Critically About Abortion, at abortionarguments.com, and it's freely available. The webpage hit 300,000 views the other day, so it's been downloaded quite a few times, and our goal is simply to get people to better understand these sorts of issues because they tend to have these very simplistic arguments, and simplistic arguments about complex issues are bad. So
All right.
freely available.
Thank you. All right, I think we're good. Thank you so much, Nathan.
Okay, thank you.
I'll go ahead and stop yours as well.